Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Radical Candor Podcast. I'm Kim Scott.
I'm Amy Sandler, and today we are so excited to welcome Denise Hamilton. Denise is an author, speaker, and consultant with 25 years of executive experience with Fortune 500 organizations. Denise has been featured by the New York Times, Harvard Business Review, MSNBC's Morning Joe, MIT Sloan Management, NBC Newsweek, Fox, CBS, so many other outlets. And most exciting, at least to me, wonderful book recently published called Indivisible: How to Forge Our Differences into a Stronger Future. And Denise, you have described yourself as an irrationally optimistic believer in our ability to solve problems rather than just name them. Your superpower is the ability to discuss challenging topics and come out the other side with positive direction and solutions. And I want to locate you all in the timing. We are recording this podcast a few weeks before the US presidential election on November 5th. And this podcast is due to be published soon after, if not the actual day after. So, naming that uncertainty that we're in right now, we are giving you a very warm welcome to you, Denise. We do need this superpower more than ever. We're going to be talking about how to manage polarization at work. And I just wanted to reconnect you and Kim, because you actually have chatted with Kim and Wesley Faulkner on the Radical Respect podcast previously. We'll put that in the show notes if you haven't heard it. Fantastic conversation. But how did you meet Kim, Denise? What brought you into the Kim Scott orbit and the Kim Scott orbit into the Denise Hamilton orbit? How did it all start?
Well, I believe that genius is just, it glows. Like it could be buried under a pile of rocks and you would find it. It would just appear, right? Like, I mean, I think that our conversation on Radical Respect was so powerful. You know, when you write a book, you do a lot of podcasts, right? You talk to a lot of people, but you don't talk to a lot of people. You know what I mean? Like real people who are thoughtful and deep and really concerned and considered about what you've written. And so out of the slew of things that I did, I mean, Kim's, our conversation just stood out because I could feel that she really cared. Right. And I think it's really funny that we're talking about this subject because I think that's kind of what's missing a lot, is do we really care about other people and what their thoughts are and what got them to their thoughts, which I think is really important as well.
I totally agree. It was such a great conversation that we had, you and Wesley and me. And then we reconnected. We were recently both giving talks, and that was fun. We sat and had a nice dinner.
It was so fun. It was like the cool kids table. It was so fun. We were like the wise sage grown-ups in the room of the 1,600 young people, like age 25 to 35, and us. It was fantastic.
Yes, it was great. It was really great.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited to see if we can channel some of this wisdom and sage advice, because I feel like we all need it. We all want it. Jason Rosoff, Kim, and I did an earlier episode on this idea of talking about politics at work, Denise. And in that podcast, and we'll put that one in the show notes as well, but I wanted to get your perspective on some of the data that we shared on that podcast. There was a 2024 survey from Resume Help. And I think the upshot is talking about politics at work is a topic that makes people pretty uncomfortable. And I want to layer in this idea of care personally that you have already spoken about. So let me share a few stats and get your take on this. First of all, more than half of workers, 51%, say they never or rarely discuss politics at work. 45%, so almost half, have regretted having political discussions at work. 25% have left or wanted to leave their job because of their boss's political beliefs. And 51% believe workplace political discussions hurt the work environment. It's interesting you mentioned about young folks that you were in that event with. And so things, across generational lines might be a little bit different. But what is your take on the state of people's appetite to talk about these things at work? And is it even a good idea?
Oh, it's so complicated. It's complicated because we have all of these different messages that are really deeply contradicting each other. First of all, I have to give a disclaimer. Like, I have a foundational belief that in a lot of ways, we have defanged government, right? And what's the impact of that? It means if you break it, you buy it. So a
Yeah.
lot of corporations have inherited problems that I don't necessarily think they are appropriate in that venue, in that environment, but because we have changed, we've so unfortunately so altered the efficacy of our legislative systems and our
Yes.
that it's almost impossible to find another venue to discuss some of these issues. So it's weird. It's like we venue shopped in a really inappropriate way. So here we are in this space, in this, vessel that we've all got to operate in and interrelate in. And the truth is, we're coming to these conversations with totally different backstories and almost totally different fact patterns, which
Yes.
is really, really the problem. We're not even disagreeing about the same thing. I think it's purple and you think it's light blue, and just yelling past each other. Then we also have kind of entered this social media environment where everything is gamified. So,
Yeah.
like, hostility and resentment and disrespect actually gets you more points than, cooperation and compromise and reconnection. And so, how do you stop that from creeping in to the workforce, right? Into the workplace? Then the next piece of it is we've had years of telling people, bring your authentic self to work, bring your full self. Oh, wait, but not that part. Right? Like, it's a complicated stew of all of these competing narratives that we're gonna have to spend a little time untangling. It's kind of a mess.
Yes. And I think, I mean, I want to give you a specific example and tell me what you think. Get your, well, I already did it, but you can give me some radical candor on whether I did the right thing or the wrong thing. So, I recently published an op-ed in the New York Times, and I did not hold back in what I thought of of who I'm voting for and why.
Right.
And when I did that, I really thought about it because there was, gosh, this was a long time ago. This was probably like, I don't know, in 2004 or something, long ago and far away. But I remember that I had mentioned in a staff meeting who I was voting for and why. I mean, just because like it was important to me. And there was a guy on my team who was not voting the same way I was, and he really was unhappy. He was angry with me for saying who I was voting for and why, because he felt like that was silencing him. And so, and I can understand that. I have more power than he did. And so I wanted to be sensitive to that. So I talked to people on the team before I did it. I said, look, I am not telling you who to vote for, but this election feels very consequential to me. And so I really want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to share what I think and why. And I think I did the right thing. But what are your thoughts on a leader of an organization, a co-founder, sort of sharing those kinds of thoughts?
So here's the problem with your question. Your question is about a moment in time. So there's no right or wrong answer to the question. The question
Yeah.
is about the relationship and the culture you've built among your team. Does your team believe that they are free to disagree? Does their team believe that you have a desire to superimpose your will on theirs? I think when we talk about these subjects, we really tend to discuss them in isolation, and they're never
Mhm.
in isolation, right? It's
Yeah.
all about organizational culture. I think about when I was in a very, very super, I'm not, how do I say this? Okay. I think about when I was in an environment that voted very differently than I do.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I literally knew that if I had said a word or stepped a toe out of line, it would have damaged my career. Like not a
Yeah.
question, 100% sure,
Yeah.
right? So to
And
me,
that seems not okay. I
that
think we
is
agree.
not
Yeah.
okay. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing. Like we talk about like talking about politics, but it's really about what is the culture? What is the environment you've created in the organization that you lead, right? What are the boundaries that you've set? What are the rules and the mores and the
Yeah.
norm
Yeah.
across the board? And then this should be a stress test of those. You should not be inventing those right now for the purposes of dealing with politics. If
Yeah.
that's where you are, you're too late.
Yeah. I think it is. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say I think it is actually important to feel free to talk about politics at work because I think so many of us have so many emotions. Like a friend of mine who studies insomnia has evidence that a lot of people have what she calls electosomnias. Like the election has people so stressed out they're not sleeping well. And if something is happening that is upsetting to me, I need to process it with the people who I'm around. I don't know. What do you think about that?
So again, my answer to everything, it's complicated. So I think that again, I'm gonna always pan back because I think that really helps us in the conversation, right? We have a loneliness epidemic.
Yes.
Most people do not live close to their families geographically. Most
Yeah.
people do not attend any kind of religious service regularly. Their friends are the people they work with. The
Yeah.
people that they interact with are the people they work with. So when you say this big, huge thing in my life that is like so animating and so motivating for me that I cannot talk about that, it feels
Yeah.
muzzling. It feels unrealistic. It feels, reinforcing of kind of how much you commit to this job. And now it's
Yeah.
really not the family they keep telling us that it is.
Yeah.
So it's important to be able to communicate around difficult conversations and topics successfully, no matter what the topic is. That's the
Yeah.
skill that we don't have.
Yes.
This
Yeah.
just shines a big spotlight on that, you know?
Yes.
And when I say that, like what I mean, and this example is gonna blow your mind. Get ready for this.
Okay. I'm ready.
Okay. Um, I have a section in my book where I talk about this idea of respect and how we have put forth a mythology around understanding that leads to respect, right?
Mhm.
Walk a mile in somebody else's shoes and that kind of thing. And I actually think it's the reverse. I think you respect someone and that helps you to better understand them. I think respect
Yes.
is the baseline. And the example I use in the book is when I moved to Texas and the teacher is calling for college and the teacher's calling a roll call and she's like, John Smith, what do you go by? And the guy says Jim Bob. And I was like, Jim Bob, where did that come from? Right. And like she goes through everybody in the room, and there's like out of 40 something people in the room, 20 people go by a nickname or a middle name or something like that. And
Yeah.
coming from the Northeast, that's not a thing. Your name
Yeah.
is your name. And we're definitely going to call you your nickname in class. But I'm in
Yeah.
Texas, when in Rome, right? Do the
Yeah.
thing. And so I asked them afterwards, I said, like, what does your mom call you? Oh, she calls me Jim Bob. Well, why didn't she name you Jim Bob? The whole phenomenon completely fascinated me,
Yeah.
right? And to this day, I have to tell you, I still don't really understand it. But if you tell me your name is Jim Bob, I'm going to call you Jim Bob. Right.
Yes.
And so I think this reverse is required. You have to give people a baseline of respect
Yes.
and then work from that to try to understand their position. So Are we trying to win and defeat somebody? Or are we really trying to understand, hey, how do you look at this differently than I look at this? If you don't have the power to do that, then you don't have the power to have these conversations at work. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a toolkit. It's a skill set that you have to have that that you are really able to listen, right? And the example that I always keep in the back of my head, this keeps me humble, is how would I respect a flat earther?
Yes.
Right? I mean, hard.
Yeah.
Really, 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 really hard. First, I have to be honest. When you tell me that you believe in the flat earth, that the earth is flat, what does that tell me about you? How does it change how I think about you, see you, feel about, like, how does it change our interaction? How much I trust you?
Yeah.
How does that change if I can get a handle on that and then get curious? When did you start believing there's a flat earth?
Yeah.
What information sources are you see, like, the
Yeah.
conversation is totally
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
That's really hard, and if you can't do it in a way that's really honestly respectful and curious, then you are proselytizing. You're not having a conversation, and that's not appropriate at work.
Yeah, yeah, and that I think that is really important, like, not to proselytize at work, not to because we've got to be respectful of people. By the way, somebody who is a mathematician who I really respect said that the flat Earth math is right. Actually, they're like he said it's very so. That's like that was interesting. That blew my mind. I was like, what? Um, and so he said, I mean, I'm sure at some point, I assume at some point it becomes wrong. But he said that the flat Earth math is quite sophisticated and interesting. So there you go.
And I love that you brought that up, Denise. Obviously, with Kim's newest book, Radical Respect, we've talked a lot about how having that kind of foundational respect is really a precursor to practice radical candor, that we can't care about someone without that respect. And in fact, I pulled that out as a quote that I love. So I'm just going to read some of your words, if that's okay. You wrote, "One mistake we have made in our quest for tolerance is centering our understanding of someone else's experience as a precursor for offering them our respect. This is a costly mistake. All human beings are worthy of respect. Instead of thinking that the more you understand someone, the more worthy they are of respect, you should lead with respect. That is the only way to get to understanding." And then you go on talking about some of the things that you were just chatting about, that your familiarity with a concept isn't required to respect the humanity of another person, that your job is to be actively on your learning journey, to listen, to be curious, and to courageously examine my beliefs to see where opportunities for growth lie. And that really did leap out at me because I would love to see, like, how can we encourage folks this, at least, in the US, the day after the presidential election, around the world, what are some of the actual practical skills that you have put into place for yourself and with the orgs you work with to actually like build the muscle of examining and expanding our capacity to hold different beliefs?
Well, I think the first thing is you didn't die. You're still here, you're still standing. One of the challenges that we have is that sometimes it's difficult to see societal change across an arc of time. Again, this like focusing on one moment as either the maker or the breaker of the entire American experiment is probably not the way to think about this. I
Hmm.
think that the challenge is to see ourselves as owners of an ongoing asset, of a developing, growing, maturing, ever changing. And this is just an episode, this is a season in it.
Yes.
And I think staying engaged with the changes that you want to see, the policies that you want to enact. I love the passion. What I don't like is the fatalism. Like
Yes.
the catastrophizing, right? The reality is that we are incredible people. We sent somebody to the moon in a tin can using computers not as sophisticated as the phones we have in our pockets right now.
It's
We
amazing.
are people that can do incredibly hard things. And right now might feel hard. Depending on how the election ended up, it might feel really hard for you. But this is not the first time it's been hard. And you are more than capable, you are more than equipped to keep the work going. And I think that's important. You mentioned in the intro, like I walk around the world with an inappropriate level of optimism, and that's true. Like I do. I think that the only people that change the world are the ones that think they can. So
Yes.
if you get knocked down, if you're out of the, I hear people say, "I'll never vote again. I'm moving. I'm did it," and I want to say, "Oh, okay, owner. Are you an owner?
Yeah.
Or are you a
Yeah.
renter? Right?
Yeah.
Like, come on. Like, this is our thing." And it's going to have ebbs and flows and ups and downs. And I have to regulate my own kind of emotions around that. And if you can do that, then you can live to fight another day, right? You can live to for us to evolve in other ways. Like this is multifaceted experiment, and we're like in phase 3. It's not even 6 or
Yeah.
7 yet.
Yeah. 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 I think that's so wise. And I think no matter what happens in the election, some people on your team are going to be happy and other people on your team are going to be sad. And I think like holding space for people's emotions is really important, and caring about each other as human beings. Because I think that one of the things that I keep coming back to that helps fuel my optimism is that I read the paper and I feel I have a pit in my stomach, and I feel like not that positive about humanity. But everybody I interact with is actually fantastic, and like how the gulf between my real human interactions, which are all wonderful,
Mhm.
and what I read about is huge. Like
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it, but people are pretty decent people.
100%. And this is why I'm really encouraging all the leaders I work with to be intentional, right?
Yeah,
This is not a passive time, right?
yeah,
The reality is somebody stuck an IV in your arm and is force feeding you like negativity and hostility and doomsday scrolling. Like that, it's just the truth. Like there are thousand psychologists and psychiatrists sitting right now trying to figure out how to make you stay on that feed and watch the horrible videos of how
yeah,
terrible people are.
yeah,
And leaders have to counteract that.
yes,
Leaders have to actively have a plan. What are you going to do to bring your teams back together? Are you going to honor people's literal grief? People
yeah,
will have actual grief around this. Are you going
yes,
to give space, manage the workload for the week of the election? What do you have everybody doing? Maybe a all team meeting is not a good idea.
yeah,
Let some dust settle, right?
yeah,
Are you thoughtful about how you are working across teams and facilitating reconnection? You're going to have to be intentional and deliberate about it. The way we have been intentionally and deliberately separated, we're going to have to do the work in the opposite direction. And I know leaders don't want to hear that. They're like, one more thing we have to do. Yes, one more thing you
that's
have
why you
to
get paid
do.
the big bucks,
Because this is why you make the big bucks
or
because
maybe
we have
not
to
the
do
big
it.
bucks, but this is why you're a leader.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It's a critical skill. And I think that when we think about grief, right? In this context, I think
Hmm.
it's really important to just remember again, you don't have to understand. You might think it's ridiculous. Like, how can this person be so upset? I have so many friends that are taking the day off. I'm working with schools that are closing school the day after the election in anticipation of this kind of angst. So I guess I want to say, let's raise the threat level to DEFCON 2 or 3 and
Yeah,
understand that you're going to need a little bit more care than you
yeah,
might normally have. Don't ignore it. Don't just la 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 and hope that everybody's going to get over it, Just like be intentional.
yeah, yeah. I think it's really important. It's interesting. So this guy from my business school class has been sending to all of the section his thoughts on who should win, which are not my thoughts.
Right.
And so I sent something he snarked, and I took the bait and I snarked back, reply. I did all the things you're not supposed to do. And then we got on an email thread, and he was like, "Well, do you believe in the Constitution?" "Yes, I believe in the Constitution." And like, there were all these things that we both really cared about. I mean, I think we should do X, he thinks we should do Y. But it was useful to like take a step back and say, we both love our country. We both care. We both think the Constitution was, it's important to have checks and balances in a government. And we both think the economy has gotten out of whack and the rich are getting too rich. And so why don't it was very helpful actually to just like remember. And I thought of you. What is what's the area of indivisibility?
Yeah. And
'Cause
brevity is the enemy. Brevity can be the enemy of that, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know that you're supposed to like wax philosophical about the deepest beliefs of your heart in like 140 characters. I think you need a few
can't do
more.
it.
You need a few more characters to
Yeah.
accurately communicate. And I think we have reduced. There's so many super important conversations that we're having in ways that are too short and are really absent of relationship, right?
Yeah.
I do think difficult conversations require a little bit of skin in the game. They require
Yeah.
a little bit of connection. And I think when you have an actual relationship, you are more invested in preserving that. If you can set that forth as the goal, then it's not so much about winning as much as understanding and hearing each other.
Yeah.
I've had, when you do the work I do, weird people talk to you about weird things. So I've had numerous people come up to me and say, "I cursed out my Uncle Joe at Thanksgiving," or "I never spoke to my grandma again." And I want to say, I'm so sorry. What about me makes you think that that's what I want you to do? Like,
Yeah.
I want you to stay in relationship. Going back to my flat earther example, right? If we decide we're going to stop talking to the flat earthers, the only people they have left to talk to are other flat earthers. And so that superimposes and reinforces the concepts in a circle. And you're never going to penetrate or get any kind of reconnection with that person. We have to stay in relationship. That being said, honey, you don't have a relationship with the 50,000 people that follow you on social media. Like, those are not relationships. Those aren't. And so getting energy drained by people you don't know, don't care about, that are 30%, 50% of them are bots. Why are we doing that? Why are we doing that? Let's get offline and into the real world, having real conversations with real people. Looking for common ground. Remember when compromise was a good word? Like, it was collaboration, like all these crazy outdated concepts. We bring them back when we like focus on the relationship and the seriousness and the value of that.
I was thinking as you answered some of the questions, what I've observed, which I love as an approach, and I just want to name it for the audience and see how this lands for you in terms of a couple of tips and almost like a mindset, an indivisible mindset, if I can. The way that you've answered some of the questions so far is, like you said, I'm going to pan out a little bit. And so just really trying to take a broader view and not just looking at whether it's the moment in time, but even just this one conversation or this one point of disagreement. So taking a broader view and also saying it's complicated. And, by definition, if something is more complicated, we're not going to be able to figure it out in 100 words. And by the way, the only 100 words I can probably focus on are the ones that are going to the way you talked at the beginning. It's going to be gamified. It's going to be those areas where we are actually disagreeing. So I think even just that idea of, can we pan out? Can we understand that these things are complicated? And then I'm really curious. We think about these almost like a roadmap or path for conversations that I might have with someone like Kim was just sharing with a business school classmate. Like, how might you advise, whether it's somebody in a school or in a small business, locating them in that moment, knowing that we might see something differently? We do a lot of role plays on this podcast. And so I'm curious, like, what are some of the tips that you might have of how to approach that conversation obviously you want to be listening and curious, but are there certain either phrases or ways into that conversation that you found helpful?
Yeah, I think the first thing is before the conversation. Why am I saying this? I have a four question rubric. Does it have to be said? Does it have to be said by me? Does it have to be said right now? Does it have to be said this way? And I can tell you, I get pulled into a lot of conflicts in organizations. And if people had gone through those 4 steps before they spoke, I think 90% of them wouldn't have happened, right? There's a deep responsibility that I think we need to take back about the impact of our words and the intent of our heart when we go into these conversations. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to understand the other person, convert the other person, shame the other person, embarrass the other person, or defeat the other person? Like, what are you actually trying to do? Why do you think this is the time for you to have that conversation, right? Just a simple thing of, do I say it in front of everyone or do I pull them to the side? Right. And there's right. Sometimes it's time to do either one, either or. Like, it's not 100%. It's that you've gone through some process of interrogating yourself. We're very clear that the other person is difficult, right? But what
Right.
we need to do is understand that we're difficult too. We are as entrenched and committed to our belief structure as they are, right? And so, with that in mind, what is your goal? What are you trying to do here? I think that people try to win arguments instead of solidify and build out relationship. And so, as they approach a difficult conversation, if I don't care what happens to this relationship, the chances of this conversation going any way that's productive are pretty low. So I
Yes.
think the first thing you have to do is check in with yourself, right? And I this is going to shock you. I think probably 70% of the comments wouldn't be made.
Yeah.
I would go that far. I think it's that high of a number because I think, Kim knows this about me. I've always struggled with the term authentic because I don't think everybody gets to be authentic. And
Yeah.
I authentically want to be in my pajamas. No one
Yeah.
cares, right? So I don't know what authentic means, right? So my word is really effective, right?
Mhm.
What is the most effective way that I could interact with this person? Does this person have the power to change or alter what I'm even presenting to them? Right? Like, are they going to be at the negotiating table at The Hague? Are they
Yeah.
in charge of HR policy? Are they like, sometimes we're like, we have made argument and debate as entertainment.
Yeah.
And that is an addiction that we have to break. So why are you saying anything? Now, sometimes there are things that need to be said, but are you saying it in such a way that the other person can hear you? Are you asking questions or are you making statements? Are you confirming? And this is a big one in today's time. Do you even have the same information? So
Yeah.
I am shocked. I said earlier that brevity is not your friend. You know what else isn't your friend? Curation.
Yeah.
Curation is, I don't think you're supposed to have curated news.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't think that's how that's supposed to be. So
And
we have people that are having conversations. They literally do not know the whole story and they're arguing different parts of the story. I
yeah.
remember I was working with a CEO that was getting ready to do a town hall, 12,000 employees, and it was following the murder of George Floyd. And we were doing a mock, just like a rehearsal. And the question that was put to him was, what is the most personally impactful part of this whole incident of George Floyd being murdered? And he said, the fact that no one tried to help. Everybody just pulled out their phones and filmed.
He
And
had no idea.
I stopped the session, I cleared the room, and I said, "Where did you get that from?" And I had to go and pull all the backs bystander footage. I had to go and pull all the bystander footage, and I had to show him all the people that were screaming and begging,
Yeah.
and he was absolutely mortified. But what I always take as very significant from this story is He was 100% sure about how the
Yeah.
events had gone.
Yeah.
And once I showed him the rest of it, he would literally, it was like his brain broke for a second
Yeah.
because he only had a piece of the information. And I challenged him. I said, if you were opening a branch in China or in London, you would do research. You would make sure you were getting your information from multiple sources. You
Yeah.
would have all kinds of, why aren't we doing that here? And that's one of the most challenging, difficult pieces of this right now, because the people that you disagree with vehemently are interacting with a piece of the story. You are interacting with a totally different piece of the story, and you hate each other because you don't know the story.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I really try to do is figure out what happened. Not
Yeah.
my recollection, not my what happened. Um,
Yes.
what do you know? What do I know? And how do we blend the facts together so we can fight fight terribly to get to the truth?
Yes. Yeah. And that is what makes us indivisible, is if we can share what we both know respectfully, we're going to get closer to the truth.
Mhm, mhm.
Denise, I'm so curious as you share that really powerful story. I mean, there's so many great and illuminating stories in your book. You talked at the top about how a lot of things that government may be used to do have sort of been outsourced to the business world. And as you're talking, it makes me wonder, like, are leaders in some way now responsible for misinformation in a way to really rectify, like, no, this is, we want to make sure as a leader, it is my responsibility to be aware, looking at multiple viewpoints. Like, I'm curious, just this whole issue of misinformation that we're seeing, which, I suspect will only get worse. Like, what is a leader's role in all of that?
I mean, it's I think that's the most challenging piece of all of this.
Yeah.
I'm really struck by the response to Hurricane Helene. I was really shaken by it because, some of this is just sport, right? Argument and debate as entertainment, right? Argutainment, as I've heard it called, which I think is hilarious. Um, but like the problem with it is we have lost our ability to lock arms and face a common goal.
Yeah.
That's serious. We do not have the ability to say, hey, there's a storm coming. How can we help each other? What do we need to do? How do we deploy the resources? Like, we're to a point where, and it's so strange coming out of an experience like COVID to not have fortified that skill, but instead to have that skill kind of decompose right before our eyes, right?
Yeah.
And so as leaders, I think it's really important to have a really deep understanding of mis and disinformation,
Yes.
in a way that I don't see how your business cannot be impacted or affected by the fact that we have so much um, misunderstanding, and that the capacity of that misunderstanding to create divisions in your organization. Right now, what do you do about it? Do you put out a newsletter that this is what really happened? Do you make a statement on every single issue? I think it gets muddy there in terms of like, how much should you be talking? How much should you be? I think the bigger challenge is like, no one's talking. Like, no one is trusted. There is no trusted institution in our society right now. What are we going to do about that? How do we
Yeah.
reverse that? And um, as much as people really hate the passion and the division and the kind of energy on both sides, I kind of secretly love it, because I hope that people care after the election and they're leaning in and they're like, wait a minute, who's on my school board? Wait
Yeah.
a minute, these NIMBYs are stopping people from building low income housing or mixed income housing. Wait a minute. Are we just building and building and we don't care about like the drainage, and are we contributing to flood patterns in different cities? Like, I want people to care about these things. And there's kind of a malaise and an apathy that we really can't afford. as a society that's really facing so many big challenges. I need us to be ready for AI. I don't think we're ready, ladies. I don't think we're
No,
ready.
I
Do you
agree.
feel ready, Amy? Amy, I don't
I
feel
don't feel
ready.
ready.
I just, as you're talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how can we, it was so interesting because it's like, there's that panning out, right? And at the same time, really, really being in it and that passion. And how can we harness that collective passion? It's kind of like what Kim said, that it might seem like when you look at the news that we don't care, but we actually do care so much. And you talk about this idea of being an owner versus a renter in Indivisible. And it feels like, can you just explain that idea and how maybe that can give us some of that irrational optimism that I think we all want to feel?
Yeah, I think about like our generation, like it's our responsibility. It's our generation's turn, right? To write the next chapter of this great story. I think of America as a great big house that we've inherited, right? And it's our generation's turn to remodel the kitchen and update the bathroom, right? Because we care about it. We're invested in it as a long-term asset, right? We understand that we inherit both the assets and the liabilities. And we understand that, we have to take care of the stuff nobody sees, like the electrical panel and the foundation crack, right? But renters use peel and stick tile, right?
Yeah.
It's about temporary extraction of the value of that resource, right? And we are overrun with extractors. It used to be noble to plant trees that you would never sit under. Now people pull up trees that other people planted. What
Yes.
are we doing right now? And
Yeah.
it's like shameless extraction upon extraction upon extraction. And I think we need a shift back to, hey, these schools in my neighborhood, they're not great schools. I'm going to move and put my child in an independent school. Okay. But can you still maybe grab 40 of your amazing, wonderful friends and support that local failing school instead of just
Yeah.
solving your problem? Do you have any interest in solving the broader problems, the broader issues? Like, I think that's what we need to do. In the book, I call it the 5-foot rule. Like, what are you doing in the 5 feet around you? And you should be able to list a couple things in the 5 feet, or not the geopolitical, not the national. What's happening down the street from your house? Do you know? I was sitting with a group of friends, uh, and I asked them, like everybody, Richie Rich group of women, and they all had housekeepers. And I said, do you know if your housekeeper has children? And the table froze. Nobody knew, let
Wow.
alone how old they were or how many they had or whatever. And I was like, how long has she been your housekeeper? 7 years, 5
Oh my
years.
gosh.
I was like, what? But that's what I mean. Like, you know everything that's happening on the news and you don't know what's happening literally under the roof of your very own house. So it's like, how do you take this passion? And right now, it's kind of, there's a little bit of a masturbatory energy of it. It's just kind of
Yeah.
like out in the world and doing nothing. But if you
Yeah.
can reroute that to actually create change in your everyday life with intentionality, that would be incredible. And so, if everybody that is fired up and emotional about the election, do you have a plan of what you're going to do now that the election's over? What are you going to do
Yeah.
with all that passion? Does it just
Yeah.
dissipate down the drain, or are we going to do something?
Make things better. I love it. That I can't think of a better way to send people off with. Like, what are we going to do to make the area right around us just a little better? I love that. It is always so inspiring to talk to you, Denise. Thank you.
Ugh, I just adore you. I think you're a genius. And Amy, you're now that I
Right
know
back
you
at
too, you're genius adjacent, which means
Genius adjacent. I'll take it. If
and
I could be 5 feet to genius, that's going to be. But that's where we cultivate it. Denise, how can people find you?
yeah, there's a woman that's another writer. Her name is Denise Hamilton, and she's got denisehamilton.com. And
DeniseHamilton.com.
I'm at denisehamilton.co.
DeniseHamilton.co.
.co. Yes.
Okay. And your book is Indivisible. And Denise, before we go, because you have such a inspiring energy, can you paint a picture for me of the world that you're imagining? You might not be here, but since you're someone who's planting those seeds, what's the future that you'd like to co-create?
Mm. The future I'd like to co-create is one that relies on actual relationship. I think as technology changes us, I think we have to have a stronger hand to make sure it doesn't change our humanity and doesn't ever cause us to give up the most valuable, incredible, beautiful parts of ourselves. Um, my future has people talking to each other, not necessarily through devices, but actually going outside, eye contact, hugs. Remember hugs?
Hugs.
I just want us to remember that we have so much more in common than we disagree on, and to be careful that our opinions of other people are really formed by our interaction with them, not by the labels that they wear or what we've been told they're like. So yeah, basically now without the news and social media.
It's a beautiful vision. I would love to be in person and get those hugs and eye contact. And as you were saying about interaction, I heard a sense of both an inner action that we need to do so that when we are interacting, we can do so from a place of caring and connectivity and relationship. So thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Love every conversation with you is a pleasure.
The Radical Candor podcast is based on the book Radical Candor, Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity by Kim Scott. Episodes are written and produced by Brandy Neal with script editing by me, Amy Sandler. The show features Radical Candor co-founders Kim Scott and Jason Rosoff and is hosted by me, still Amy Sandler. Nick Carissimi is our audio engineer. The Radical Candor podcast theme music was composed by Cliff Goldmacher. Follow us on LinkedIn, Radical Candor the Company, and visit us at radicalcandor.com.